In this lecture, we will be talking about Indus Valley, and I think this is another one of these rare lectures where I'm going to have a theme. And the theme is Indus Valley is mysterious. And I've come up with this theme because we don't really know a lot about this civilization. Now, there's a few reasons for this. First of all, we didn't even know this civilization even existed until relatively recently. Here's the story. So what happened was in the 1920s, there were some people that were building a railroad, the city of Karachi. And they were using local material, and they realized that this material they were using looked like some very distinctive baked bricks almost. And so what they did is they called in archaeologists who came and checked out the situation, and they found that these people were accidentally using baked bricks from a civilization we didn't even know about to build a railroad. So it's been less than 100 years that we've even known that this civilization has even existed. The sites of the Indus Valley are still actively being excavated. So clearly there's still a lot that we continue to learn about this mysterious civilization. Now, another reason why we don't know very much about them is that they occupy that gray intermediate area between historical and prehistorical designations, which, as you know by now, it means that they had the written word, so technically we can consider them to be historic. However, their writing has not yet been translated, so we cannot glean historical information from their text. So that certainly obscures our understanding of these people, who are mysterious. Now, the other thing that complicates our understanding of Indus Valley, the third thing, is that they didn't really create a lot of the types of art and architecture that we typically rely on to reconstruct a culture. They did not build palaces or temples. They did not build tombs. And even at this point, scholars consider even graves to be very rare. And you could see how not having these types of structures would really muddy our understanding of their religious, their burial, and their political practices. On top of this, they did not produce large-scale sculpture, nor have we yet to discover any of their paintings. Now here we have a map of Indus Valley, and I also have the dates, the approximate dates during which this civilization existed. They're called the Indus Valley because, as you can see, their settlements were situated around this waterway here, which is known as the Indus River. Now, the two sites on this map that I think are important for us to take a look at is this site right here, which is Mohenjo-Daro, which means Mound of the Dead, and this was the largest Indus city. The second largest was Harappa, which we see right in here, and Harappa is the one that has been most extensively excavated so far, although most of what we're going to look at in today's lecture is coming from Mohenjo-Daro. Now, we don't know why the Indus civilization declined. Here's some more mysteries. What happened to these people? Why did they eventually abandon this site? Now, there's a lot of different possibilities, and scholars debate. Nobody's agreed upon anything. But the one that I like the better is that it might be primarily having to do with the Indus River and changes that happened during this river, that the river shifted. And this would have created multiple problems. First of all, there would be no water for agriculture, and there would also be no water for drainage. And we're going to see when we look at some of the Indus city planning that they were really talented in terms of irrigation engineering, and they relied quite extensively on drainage. Because they didn't have water for drainage, if the river shifted, this would have also caused an increase in waterborne diseases, and it would have affected the public health. And actually, there is some evidence to this when people have begun to study the skeletons that have been excavated from this site. And so because there's this evidence, I do quite like this theory. Now, there is a little bit of back and forth. Some scholars argue that we do have evidence of fortifications in Indus Valley, walls, that would have indicated that they needed to protect themselves and that they were under the threat of warfare. I don't know. This is something that, and again, a lot of scholars kind of debate upon, and some say that there really is no evidence for warfare. So certainly the jury is still out on that. Now, I just wanted to show you this because I think it's super cool. This is an aerial view of Mohenjo-Daro. So you can see that this is a fully populated city that was laid out in this sort of grid-like system. And they even had their homes, which are kind of like multi-storied, sort of like apartment complex situations. Now, what I would like to look at is this structure right here, which is known as the Great Bath. And here you have a close-up. Now, architecture, this is yet another enigmatic, mysterious feature of the Indus Valley civilization because, as I said, they didn't really build a lot of varying types. The other mystery, because mysteries clearly abound, is that it has to do with their building material. They used baked bricks to make their structures. And these bricks were made locally, and we know that because the composition of the bricks have been studied. Now, if you look back on this slide here, obviously they needed a lot of bricks. But here is the mystery. No Indus brick-making sites have ever been found. We know they made the bricks locally, but no site of where exactly in the cities has been discovered. I think that's mysterious. The Great Bath, which we see here, is one of the largest structures in all of Indus Valley to have been built. And it indicates to us, as I had said, that they had irrigation technologies. This actually, what you're looking at here, is one of the earliest public water tanks in the ancient world. So they were very clearly advanced in terms of sanitation as well as drainage systems. Now, what I like is this. The Romans, they are very well known for their irrigation and aqueduct systems. But Indus Valley is coming and creating these things by about 2 millennia before the Romans even started their irrigation. So we can say at least that the people of Indus Valley, they were advanced and they were great architects. Actually, we got drains, sewers, and indoor plumbing, and this is all pretty typical in most Indus structures. We just have here the Great Bath as the most sophisticated example. Now, this is really all I can say about the structure, unfortunately, because we're really not sure of what its function was. What scholars do say is that probably it functioned as some sort of ritual bathing, but there really is not any archaeological evidence that the structure had religious purposes. Could have been used for public bathing, but again, we don't have any evidence to support these suggestions. All right, let's talk about seals. So, as I said, our knowledge of Indus Valley is really limited because we can't yet decipher their writing. But the art certainly can provide us with some idea of what these people were like and what kind of lives they led. Now, here's an example of their writing up here, sort of linear, almost like cuneiform sort of situation. And again, we cannot yet translate it. Now, what I think is interesting is that Indus Valley seals are somewhat similar to those that were produced in Mesopotamia. And we have an example here, and this is an example that's really similar to the one that is in your textbook. So some of the similarities is that both Indus Valley and Mesopotamian seals combine imagery and text. And unfortunately, in this example, I don't have one that has the text in there, so to take my word for it. I chose this image because it shows you the seal right here. But typically, you would see a seal that would have text up in here. So both combine imagery and text, and both of them were made in copious amounts. In both Mesopotamia and in Indus Valley, archaeologists have found seals that number in the thousands. Now the difference is that Mesopotamian seals are cylindrical, which you can see here. It's a cylinder, and just imagine rolling that across wet clay to make this impression. Indus Valley, their seals are square. So that's how you can tell the difference. Now, another difference between Indus Valley and Mesopotamian seals is the function, as far as we can tell. So Mesopotamian seals were individualized. And what that means is that they would wear the seals around the neck. Imagine like a hole that runs through and you could put a string through, hang on your neck. People would wear these, And so each one belonged to the individual. And some scholars believe that they kind of acted like a signature. And oftentimes when people died, they would be buried with these seals. Now let's look more at some more examples of Indus Valley seal impressions. Okay. Now in terms of the function of Indus Valley seals, they have primarily been discovered on commodities, things like grain bales. And this leads scholars to believe that their likely function was to regulate trade or perhaps to document transactions. They also could have documented the ownership of property, where these might be like kind of like an ancient logo in a way, an animal that would be affiliated with like a family group or some sort of like commerce group. Maybe this is like the name of the group or the name of the family or clan association. So maybe also they could have indicated trade destinations, or they could have indicated trade routes. Clearly there are numerous possibilities, and we don't know the answer. The Indus Valley people are mysterious. Now in these seals, okay, you see the animals are subject matter, and they actually are the primary subject matter. Most Indus Valley seals depict animals. The presence of these animals do indicate to us that they domesticated their animals. And maybe, considering that these seals had this possible function having to do with trade, maybe it indicated that animals had a role in trade. They were used to like transport commodities or things like that. This one I threw in just for fun because this is that master of animals, man between two animals, which is that really common motif that is cross-cultural. And we see it in so many ancient cultures, yet what the link is something that scholars are not sure of. Now I'm showing you another rare Indus Valley seal. And again, what makes this one rare is that there's a person in it. The other thing that makes this one rare is that it probably is a seal that has a religious function, not an economic function. Now, again, we can't be super specific because we don't really know much about Indus Valley religious beliefs. However, if you look at this seal and if you look at the iconography, it does seem to suggest that the people of Indus Valley, that they either practiced Hinduism or some version of Hinduism, like an early precursor of the religion. Now, at this point, you have studied Hindu art in this class, so this is a good way to have a little bit of a review. So what I would like you to do is I would like you to go to your notes on Hindu art and pause this video and see if you can identify what iconography, what symbolism might you see here that would support this scholarly belief that these people practice some sort of iteration of Hinduism. So hopefully you did that. And now let's talk about the iconography, okay? First, let's talk about the headdress, right? We know that headdresses are always a really great clue, and so we see this kind of three-part horned headdress. Now we see that there is at least some sort of cultural and artistic affinity with Mesopotamia, indicated with the seals. And we do know that in Mesopotamia that the horned headdress means what? If you said looking at a deity, you would be correct. It's used to indicate that you're looking at a deity. And then you can even argue that the three parts of this headdress might be a reference to the Hindu triad. Now there's another thing on this seal that is a representation, a symbolic representation of the Hindu triad. Can you see it? The three faces, the Maheshvara motif. It's kind of hard to tell because this front face has been broken up. You can see 1, 2, and 3, right? Again, a reference to the Hindu triad of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Now, what we also have is we also have a phallic symbol, which is right in here. Now, we call this particular phallic symbol an ichthyphallus, and this is mostly a term that is used to describe a compositional device. It is when the phallus has a very prominent and clear place within the composition. This phallus is like right in the center. You've got implied lines that lead us there. It's a prominent compositional placement, therefore it is an ichthyphallus. Now the phallic symbol is related to Hindu. Can you recall why? Do you remember the name of the non-iconic symbol that represents Shiva? Which again, Shiva's non-iconic symbol is the phallus, and we call that the lingam. And we can support this identification of a lingam or a phallic symbol associated with the concept of lingam because linga have been discovered in Harappa. Now there's one more thing. You see that Shiva is surrounded by animals. Does this sound familiar to you, or does this seem familiar to something that you saw in the Hindu lecture? If you're thinking about the incredible sculpture, The Descent of the Ganges, you are on the right track. This motif is Shiva as Lord of the Animals, where all the animals come together to give praise to Shiva. All right, here we have another example of Indus Valley sculpture. This is the Priest King, which was discovered at Mohenjo-daro. Now, it is called the Priest King, but this is a title that has made scholars very uncomfortable because it seems to be predicated on quite a few assumptions. And assumptions are very dangerous when you study art history. This is how you get in trouble and you come up with ideas that may not be completely accurate. Now, first of all, and I alluded to this earlier on in the lecture, there's no evidence for warfare. So warfare often accompanies a centralized kingship, hence the name priest king. We don't have any weapons or any fortifications, although that's debatable, that have been found at Indus Valley. Further, and think back to Mesopotamia, there's no art that's been discovered that is depicting violence or fighting. So this king part of the title is kind of sketchy. And because we don't have palace structures, we can't get a sense if they had centralized kingship in that respect either. Now, it's also given the name Priest King because of its fancy clothing. And you also have this lovely, neatly trimmed beard. But again, we don't even know if they had kings. Now, the priest part comes from the garment, this one-shouldered garment. And that was something that we often saw on holy people depicted in art made in India, as well as in the Buddhist world. So this is where Priest King is coming from. Now, this is also supported by the trefoil pattern, this three-part pattern that you see here. This was worn by gods as well as priest kings in Mesopotamia, particularly in Sumeria. So this is kind of a comparative interpretation, and it is helpful in coming up with possibilities, although again, we don't have the evidence to corroborate this interpretation, which makes it a little bit sketchy. Finally, okay, we have this idea of the priest king, particularly the king, because of this regality that the sculpture has. It feels very regal. The figure holds himself upright with a stiff posture, with this air of authority. He's almost looking down at the viewer. So that might indicate a sense of power as well. Now, another thing that we could maybe look at to maybe try to argue for this idea of a king is think about structures like the Great Bath. This might indicate a centralized authority, a kingship, because they would need to have someone that would oversee and fund such an expansive public architecture project. All right, we move on to the Dancing Girl. This was discovered in Mohenjo-daro. And this is an important sculpture for us to look at because it indicates to us that the Indus had metal technology, which they used to create bronze sculptures such as the one you see here. There have been quite a few female figures such as this discovered, as well as nude male figures as well. And they're nude, both the male and the female, arranged in these dynamic postures that have been interpreted as dancing. Because of the nudity, some scholars have suggested that there is a fertility function to these sculptures. Maybe, but we really need to be careful with this because we do know that many ancient cultures practiced ritualized nudity in contexts that were unrelated to fertility rites. So just because there's nudity doesn't always mean it's fertility. Could be a ritual situation. And I personally think that we also need to be a little bit more careful about the dancing interpretation as well. This pose is just a little too static in my mind. To me, it just looks like contrapposto stance. If you want to see dancing poses that are active and energetic, Look at Indian Hindu sculpture. That is dancing. This looks like someone just kind of standing there. Now, if these sculptures were connected to religious practice, which again, there's no evidence to support that interpretation, it would likely be part of some sort of domestic ritual because remember, they didn't build temples. We'll finish up this lecture with a particularly fabulous sculpture, which is the nude male torso. And this one came from Harappa. Now I wanted to bring this one in to show you because I wanted you to see the stylistic range that occurs in Indus Valley, where we go from abstract, overly elongated proportions, like we saw with the dancing girl, to this beautifully nuanced naturalism that's seen here in the nude male torso. It also demonstrates to us that Indus Valley sculptors worked with a variety of materials, right? Like a hard stone that we see with the priest king, the bronze, and then this one is made of a softer sandstone, which likely is what allows these beautiful gradations of form. Such a lovely sculpture. Now, we don't know much about this sculpture in terms of its function. Scholars say that the circles at the shoulders, which you can see right here, and there's one up here on the head, that this indicates that it likely had arms and a head originally attached. I just want to say I'm pretty uncomfortable with this because look where the circles are placed. That is a super awkward place for arms to be sticking out. Plus, you can see some breakage in here, which indicates that there were probably arms that came down this way. Something separate probably was attached here. What that could be, I don't know. But maybe what I could guess is some sort of ritual garment, perhaps. Again, we don't know. And the thing also makes me uncomfortable about this is that, okay, super awkward appendages coming out of shoulders, that's weird looking. It doesn't look natural, but yet everything else is super natural. And that was something that the sculptor took really a careful approach in articulating. That seems to me to be a conflict that I just can't easily reconcile. It keeps me up at night. And this concludes our lecture on the very mysterious people from Indus Valley.